Today is Sunday, August 9th. Movie of the week. A trip back to the year 2014 when we could say times as a moviegoer were either more simple or more complicated depending on how far back you go with this. But we will start this off with a movie that has been somewhat, I'd say, overlooked and a little bit underrated, within this last past 6 years. X-Men: Days of Future Past, directed by Bryan Singer. I won't say that it was a proper sequel to X-Men First Class. I'm not even sure if we can consider that to be a sequel to X-Men The Last Stand, but the less said about that, the better.
Right.
And going back and watching it again, probably about my third time watching this movie, I would say objectively, this is probably the last X-Men movie where you could see that time was taken and the approach was a little bit more deliberate in terms of what the final product came out to be. It was a blended combination of the cast from the original trilogy and the cast from X-Men First Class. We're talking about in terms of ranking and where this movie falls. I would say this falls into the category of a good X-Men movie. Now, the standard isn't all that high. I would say there are probably about four movies with the X-Men proper title that I could say are genuinely good movies that I enjoy. And X-Men Days of Future Past kind of marks the end of an era. It marks the end of being able to trust X-Men as a brand to carry a blockbuster film as well as deliver in terms of checking off certain boxes. Before I get a little bit deeper into that, I want to know what your thoughts are on X-Men Days of Future Past.
I still remember going to the opening weekend of that and
Mm-hmm.
seeing that in theaters with my siblings, man. Days of Future Past, I think, is underrated and under the radar for a lot of these movie people in the culture when they rank
Mm-hmm.
in their top 10 or top 20 films of like superhero films. I think they did a stellar job with it. I agree with those sentiments of the First Class. Is it a real sequel to First Class? I don't really think so, but I think it
Mm-hmm.
blended what First Class did well and really mashed up with what we had prior to that. I think First Class really cleaned up and really reestablished X Men as a brand, as a quality film franchise after, let's say, Last Stand and the Wolverine Origins, and yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Right, right. And I mean, the tricky part of it for me is, we talked about this kind of off air, like movie of the week. My intention behind going back and looking at one particular movie at least once a week is to view it through a different lens, but also kind of try to provide a little bit of context and kind of blend the things that I know about it and try to put that into my next viewing of that movie. So for me, watching X-Men Days of Future Past, the things that jump out at me right off the bat are that I feel like with the success of X-Men First Class, I think, and the pressure coming from the MCU that still hadn't fully developed yet, I think this was almost like, I'm not going to say a Hail Mary, but this was a cannonball. But I think this was that shot that needed to be taken in order to kind of revitalize it and give it that big movie feel. Because X-Men First Class, while I enjoyed it, a lot of people like it. People can point to it as being one of the better movies under that umbrella. It didn't have that same feel as Days of Future Past. It was a different cast, mostly unknown actors, and in many ways, it was almost like a hard reset for everything that was already established. Days of Future Past, Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart,
Yeah.
Halle Berry with a cameo.
Oh yeah.
It was kind of meant to be, I think, a return to form, or at least marketed as a return to form, and then kind of passing the torch off to some of the other characters. I do think that plot wise, there was some things that ended up changing. I mean, the biggest thing that jumped out to me was having Mystique as the primary character driving the plot of the movie, right? And I
For good
think
or worse.
right. And
Yeah.
a lot of that had to do with the fact that in the interim years between 2011 and 2014, Jennifer Lawrence became a movie star. Starred in the Hunger Games, won an Academy Award. So her level of profile changed between this first movie and the next one, right?
Right.
The fact that she became a star on the level that she did overshadowed, I think, some of the better elements that could have been incorporated into this being the one, right? Days of Future Past is what a lot of X-Men fans point to as something that they wanted to see live action, considering that X3 kind of botched the entire Dark Phoenix endeavor until last year, but that's a different combo.
We'll say botched. Yeah. We'll leave it at that.
um, so initially going into it, you could say, okay, that's a change. Blending some of the cast from the original movies into this, and then bringing along the cast from X-Men First Class. That's another big change. Another thing that kind of stuck out to me in particular was Hugh Jackman as Wolverine.
All right. Going on that for a little bit because to me his performance was pretty straightforward from his previous films on the
Mm-hmm.
character.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, man, go elaborate on that a little bit.
Okay, so for me in this movie, Hugh Jackman is kind of like the glue that holds everything together. He's the OG character for the main two characters in that particular saga. And seeing Wolverine, Logan, as that OG character was something that was new for me because the first time I watched the movie, when I seen it in the theater, I was just excited to see Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in the X-Men movie. But I think his character in the movie was our reason to invest. I mean, the original in the comic book, if I'm not mistaken, Kitty Pryde was the one that went back in time, correct? If I'm not mistaken, yeah, Kitty Pryde was the one that went back in the original comic book.
Yeah, that was her for sure in that
Okay, and then
series.
the animated series, we had Bishop going back in time. Um, for obvious reasons, you're not gonna sell the masses on an X-Men movie sending a character like Bishop that had never been introduced, or a character like Kitty Pryde that's not really on the level like that. So it was nice that they chose Wolverine to send back in time, but it also made sense considering that Hugh Jackman is probably the biggest star that was attached to any X-Men film.
True, and I think also to
Mm-hmm.
that effect that also the storyline is more interesting if you send a wild, unstable persona like Wolverine to the past. It's gonna cause drama. There's more tension involved because he's not a team player. He's
Mm-hmm.
not someone who's easily understandable to connect with people. So sending Kitty Pryde or Bishop would have been kind of cool to keep it accurate or to keep some of those same aspects from what they did in the 90s cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
But Wolverine provides the best drama for unstable, for the personalities colliding and opposition of views and so on and so forth. It's just more interesting if you send Wolverine to try to actually mentor a
Mm-hmm.
young Charles and a young Eric when he is in no shape or form to mentor anybody really. So that was a good storyline aspect to it and increased the drama rather than just sending kind of two flat characters who Charles could probably be like, oh yeah, sure, I believe you. We have someone like Wolverine who's kind of a hothead, a dick to other people. is there's more opposition. Your walls are more up. You're more guarded toward whatever he's gonna say to you. So
Hmm.
I think that was that was from financial means, marketing means, and also storyline means. That was a really good decision based on sending Wolverine back. I know the Kitty Pride fans are still upset to this date, but it is what it is. I mean,
It's
she served
business,
her purpose. Yeah,
right?
right.
It's business, and the way I view this particular movie, the word I was looking for was the blow off. This was the blow off for, in my opinion, this was the blow off for the X-Men as a film franchise under that title.
Like a buzzer beater.
Yeah, exactly. And it's unfortunate because as much as I enjoy this movie, I do feel that certain decisions that were made within the story undercut the entire X-Men First Class and what they were trying to make that particular series of movies into. It undercut it, and I think long term, it sunk the ship personally
Mm.
because it sunk the ship. I got to keep it 100. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, man.
it sunk the ship because with X-Men First Class, we went into it fresh. We knew that it was attached to X-Men. We knew that there were characters such as Charles Xavier, Magneto. We were getting a different perspective on those characters. They were taking the ball and then they were going to run with it. As much as I enjoyed X-Men Days of Future Past, and I keep saying this, the long-term damage was that style-wise, even with the visuals, there's a part in that movie where they're in the underground floor in 1973, but the X door to get to Cerebro is exactly the same as it was in the year 2000 when the first X-Men movie is set and came out.
Yeah, that wasn't the
there's
case in First Class.
and there's a part of me that feels like because the director Bryan Singer kind of wanted us to know without telling us that this is his X-Men movie and he made the first one, that this is a visual cue to let us know that this is something that draws back to the original, even if the timeline and the setting that that movie is in doesn't necessarily match up. I don't want to be nitpicky about it, but that's just something that kind of stuck out to me, and it was just a little bit strange. Like, okay,
That's
even deeper,
interesting.
yeah,
Oh,
even
go
further
ahead,
than
man.
that. Some of the mutants who were introduced in X-Men First Class that were very interesting, that we got to debut and maybe want to see more from going forward. Azazel, Angel, and Emma Frost in particular are some of the ones that stick out to me. Banshee as well, because he was mentioned in a scene in the movie as well. But these were characters who were introduced under a different director, under a different team, under a different theme.
Right.
We seen still images of them post autopsy in this next movie.
They got jobbed hard. Yeah,
Exactly. And
they
it's
did.
okay. It's okay that they didn't make it, but the fact that they're only mentioned in one passing scene, and then you have mutants such as Colossus, okay,
Yeah.
um,
Before
Kitty
Deadpool,
Pryde,
pre Deadpool,
pre
Colossus, mind
Deadpool.
you.
You got Kitty Pryde. Now, Kitty Pryde was in X-Men Last Stand, but if my memory serves me correct, she wasn't a big part of any plot in that particular movie, aside from being something to get in between Bob Drake and Rogue, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right. The Juggernaut had to chase someone down, so Kitty
Right.
Pryde fit the bill. Yeah.
And then, like I said, you got Bob Drake. You know what I mean? You got
Yeah.
Bob Drake. Now, my only argument in this is that we seen that character in 3 other X-Men movies. There's nothing new that's going to be brought to the table by presenting Bobby Drake in the future with a full beard and a couple gray hairs.
Yeah, that is true. You had 3 films to make him interesting, and you didn't get
And
it done then.
nope, not at all. And it just doesn't make sense to me how these characters already got their screen time are held in a higher priority than characters that more or less kind of made that first class movie what it was because they were so different and we weren't expecting to see them. And when we seen them, it was like, wow, this is something new. This is something fresh right here. Maybe we could see them more in the future. Emma Frost, for me, was the most underrated character in X-Men First Class. No, they didn't give her a lot to do. Performance by the actress January Jones, and just seeing another telepath kind of spar with Charles Xavier a little bit, and also highlight how powerful Charles Xavier is as a telepath. That was something that was interesting to me. We never got to see the run that any of these first iterations of the Brotherhood of Mutants got to do with Magneto because by this movie they're already dead.
Yeah, yeah, that would have been a very interesting angle to see that first iteration of the Mutant Brotherhood, Brotherhood of Mutants.
Right.
And Emma Frost was a lot better in First Class than her cameo was in Wolverine Origins. So
Absolutely.
I'm not even
Absolutely.
sure they consider that canon at this. And that's what we loved about First Class is that it really just took it back to ground zero and just
Mm-hmm.
really wiped the slate clean of the shitty films of the last two or three films
Right.
and established the X-Men as a quality superhero franchise, quality writing, and
Mm-hmm.
quality filmmaking. And the fact that Bryan Singer, upon viewing these films, first Days of Future Past, I actually didn't catch up on that. I thought it was just nostalgia. I thought it was a marketing ploy to lure in those original people who saw the first three X-Men films to say,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, we're back and we're
But
bigger and better than ever." But
right.
yeah, but from what you're telling me, it makes sense how Bryan Singer kind of said, "Hey, these are my blueprints. This is my X-Men," and the way he kind of did these prior characters dirty of First Class, that first roster, it kind of makes sense now to me why those creative decisions were made. It would have been cool to see Banshee from First Class, who you skipped on the original trilogy, to see him in the future with a new suit, with a beard, battle hardened or whatever. Somebody to represent that First Class roster besides Beast. You know what I'm saying? To
Facts.
kind of to connect the past and the future together. That would have been really neat. Or let's see
Mm-hmm.
Havoc have his relationship with his brother Cyclops. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I haven't seen you in a few years, blah blah blah. Like, oh, Cyclops died. I'm here to try to continue his name from X-Men Last Stand where he died. To
Mm-hmm.
have Havoc in the future would have been cool as well. Like stuff like that would have been something to represent that first class roster to solidify
Yep.
themselves. But they cucked them. They jobbed them
Yep.
and they jobbed them, and not only them, but the mutant Brotherhood of Mutants as well. That first roster as well with Azazel and who else? The Wasp lady,
Yep.
uh,
Angel.
Angel. Yeah, like all of them were pretty much jobbed for just for exposition reasons and for Bryan Singer to say, hey, like I got the real team.
Right.
This part.
Like that. The way I feel about that is that's kind of shitty. And I mean, I'll wrap this up here. I don't want to make this segment too long, but the part of it that I'm just gonna end this particular segment on is the best parts of this movie for me are the parts where we're with the newer cast. The best parts of the movie are when we're in 1973, when we're actually living or seeing our characters from First Class carry the plot.
Oh yeah, most definitely, dude. That those were the interesting parts. It was very the concept of First Class to show the relationship between Charles and Eric and really build a story in that was genius. It was really
Mm-hmm.
genius and it was a really solid storyline. And honestly, with the way First Class ended, the X-Men trilogy series should have just ended with First Class and then go on to Deadpool and Logan. At
That's how
that
you
point,
feel?
yeah, I
Okay.
mean, at that point, you had the happy kind of ending, and then like they gave you no reason to continue in the past. You know what I'm saying? They gave you no reason. If it's established in continuity that in the future everything turns out okay, then Apocalypse, right? and Dark Phoenix are nullified. They don't count because
Okay,
you
okay,
know that that it's going to be a good ending. You know
my
that in
bad.
the
You were saying that you think Days of Future Past should have been the last one, not First Class.
oh yeah, Days of Future
Okay,
Past should have been the first. Should have been the last one,
I agree.
especially with the ending that they had,
I agree.
because yeah, the next two films it was like useless because like, okay, well we know unless this is they established that this is an alternative timeline. Well, we know that the good guys are going to win because in the future Wolverine went back and everything's a okay. So there is no there is no drama, there is no tension. Next two films. So honestly, they could just continued in the future with Logan, how everything did turn out okay. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So with that, yeah, they left no reason for us to care in the
Nope.
past. So there's no reason to continue in the past. All you can do is kind of continue forward.
Right.
Deadpool did it in a way that was fun and cool to see the past gen with him in Deadpool 2, which continuity wise doesn't make much sense, but it was a nice cameo. It was Deadpool 2. I'm one of those. I'm one of the few that believe the second is better than the first, in my
Okay.
opinion. Just because there's a little bit more X-Men involvement than the first movie. But I get the first movie was pioneered the whole thing.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
yeah, we that's it. See that I almost fell down the rabbit hole, but
yeah.
almost fell down the rabbit
Almost. I
hole.
pulled back on that one. I pulled back.
But
You know, I can't get into that. I'm not gonna get into
but yeah, just to wrap it up on Days of Future Past again, like the strategy behind it was good. It was a good movie. The good parts of it outweighed the bad parts. They got more right than what they got wrong. I do feel that the movie could have been better and more interesting if Bryan Singer wasn't the director, because what ended up coming after, I think, exposed a little bit that this newer form of the X-Men that was established in First Class was out of his depth. He
yeah.
wasn't the guy who needed to be steering the ship post Days of Future Past.
Right. He shouldn't have touched anyone from his cast, from his original cast from the '90s or early 2000s. That I totally agree with you, man. A different director should have, or the same director from First Class could have took what he did and just adjusted their plans and continue on forth with some new fresh material to build up
Yep.
to Gene and all of them. Because honestly, even though it's set in the past, if they would have continued with a different roster after first, so okay, so the first class is gone. What about a second class or a
Mm-hmm.
third class? So a new set of characters leading up to, like, let's say the last film in the past had the teaser for Gene, Storm, and all of them coming together. Then you'd be like, okay, now it kind of connects in a more interesting way. When you introduce
Mm-hmm.
Gene and them in Apocalypse early, I think it's like, okay, well, it's Gene, Cyclops, and Storm in the original cast. Like, big whoop de doo. It's cool that they're young, but if you had a different roster, it might have been more interesting to change it up and be more invested in a new cast until the OG cast from the Singer era gets introduced. So I
Right.
totally agree with you, man. Yeah, Days of Future Past, I think underrated. Did the time travel thing before the Avengers. So yeah, Days of Future Past, definitely a great movie. Should have been the ending to an era. It was the ending to an era, and
They just didn't know it.
they just didn't know it in hindsight. So yeah, Days of Future Past, definitely great film.
Yep.
Anyone who hasn't seen it yet, I highly recommend going back seeing X1, X2, First Class, and then Days of Future Past to get full context on that movie.
Right. And there is a road cut, but yeah.
Yeah.
I've not seen the road cut, and I mean, yeah, we'll get into in the cuts and all of that stuff later. But